The brisket had been in the smoker since 4 that morning, and by the time Renata's rental car crunched into my driveway, the whole street smelled like hickory and patience. I checked the meat probe one more time, wiped my hands on the dish towel I'd had since before my husband died, and went to meet her at the door before she could ring the bell and wake Mr. Halloran's dog next door. She hugged me the way she always did, arms tight, chin hooked over my shoulder, like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go too soon. 6 months since I'd seen her in person, and she still smelled like the same drugstore perfume she'd worn since college. "You're limping less," she said, pulling back to look at me. "Physical therapy twice a week. I could probably outrun you now." Low bar, Mom. I hate running. Caleb and Danny arrived 20 minutes later, and I heard them before I saw them, Caleb's truck door slamming too hard, the particular rhythm of his boots on the porch steps, quick and a little uneven, the gait of a man who'd spent 15 years on job sites favoring his left knee. Some habits you keep from 30 years running sound checks. You learn to read a room by its footsteps before anyone says a word. Danny came in behind him holding a bakery box, her smile arriving a half second after the rest of her face, like she'd rehearsed it in the car. She kissed my cheek, told me the house smelled incredible, and asked where the bathroom was before she'd even set the box down. I pointed her down the hall and caught Caleb watching her go with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not worry, exactly. More like a man checking that a door was still closed. We ate on the back porch because the evening had finally cooled off, cicadas working themselves into a frenzy in the oak trees, string lights I'd hung myself 2 summers ago humming faintly against the breeze. Caleb told a long story about a bathroom remodel that had turned into a full-gut job when he found rot behind the tile, and I watched him work the table the way he always did, pulling Danny into the story at just the right moment. Letting Renata laugh at the parts that needed laughing at, refilling my tea before I'd even noticed the glass was low. My son could charm a jury. He'd been doing it since he was 6 years old and broke my good lamp. Business good, though? Renata asked. You said things were tight last year. Tight's the wrong word. Tight makes it sound like we're struggling. Caleb reached for another roll. We had a rough stretch. We're past it. Good, Renata said, and then, setting down her fork with the particular briskness she used when she'd decided it was time to say the real thing she'd flown here to say, because I've been dying to ask about the cottage. Is it everything Mom wanted? I still haven't seen pictures. The porch went quiet in that specific way a room goes quiet right before something breaks. I heard my own spoon click against the side of my sweet tea glass, a small bright sound, and it seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. What cottage? I said. Renata laughed, waiting for the joke to land, and when my face didn't move, her laugh thinned out into something uncertain. The retirement cottage. Off Riverside, near the Percy Warner side. I wired the money in April. $620,000, Mom. I told Caleb exactly what it was for, I even put it in the transfer memo. For Mom's cottage, Riverside purchase. He said he'd handle everything since he was local and I couldn't fly back and forth from Denver every other week for showings. I set my glass down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to shake and you don't want anyone to see it yet. I never received any house, I said. Renata, I don't have a cottage. I've lived in this house for 31 years, the cicadas kept going. Somewhere down the block a lawn sprinkler ticked on. Everything ordinary kept right on being ordinary while the 5 words I just said finished landing. Renata turned to her brother. Caleb, he didn't answer right away, and that silence told me more than anything he could have said. I have spent my whole professional life listening to the half-second before someone speaks, the breath they take. Whether it catches or comes easy, and Caleb's breath caught, there's a whole explanation, he started. The market shifted, the place I found wasn't right for her, I was going to, Caleb. Renata's voice had gone flat and cold, a tone I hadn't heard from her since she was 19 and caught him borrowing her car without asking. Where is $620,000? It was Danny who moved first. She stood up so fast her chair scraped backward across the porch boards, a sound like a fingernail down a chalkboard, and the tote bag hanging off the back of it swung with her and hit the porch rail. I left something in the car, she said, already 3 steps toward the yard. Voice too high, words coming out clipped and wrong, Danny. Caleb's voice cracked on the second syllable of her name. Sit down, Renata said. Nobody's going anywhere until somebody tells me where my money is. Danny wasn't listening. She was moving fast across the grass in sandals that weren't built for it, and her ankle rolled on the uneven ground by the flower bed, and she went down hard onto one knee with a small strangled cry, the bag flying off her shoulder and landing upside down in the grass. A wallet, a lip balm, a phone case, and a manila folder skidded out across my lawn in the porch light. Caleb was off the porch before I'd even registered him standing, hauling Danny up by the arm. Both of them fumbling in the grass for her things while Renata and I stood frozen on the steps. He scooped the folder up too fast, too desperate, the kind of fast that tells you everything about what's inside something before you've seen it, and in his hurry a single sheet slid loose and drifted, face up, onto the porch floorboards at my feet. I bent down slower than I used to, my hip reminding me it hadn't fully forgiven me for the surgery, and picked it up. It was a deed. A property deed, county seal stamped in the corner, a lake address I didn't recognize, and under grantee, printed in plain black type, a name that wasn't mine. The name on the deed was Caleb's. Not a company. Not an LLC hiding behind some clever acronym, just his name, printed plain as a grocery list, next to an address on Half Moon Lake, 40 minutes outside the city. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time after Renata drove Caleb and Danny home that night, the deed spread across my knees, running my thumb over the raised county seal like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense. Renata came back at 8 the next morning without calling first, dark circles under her eyes, 2 coffees in hand like a peace offering to a fight that hadn't happened yet. I want to see it, she said. The house. I want to see where $620,000 went. I should have told her no. I should have said we'd let the lawyers handle it, let the family sort itself out slower, with less gasoline poured on it. But some part of me needed to see it too, needed to stand inside the thing my son had built out of my money and hear what it sounded like. The drive out took us past the interstate exits and into the kind of 2-lane road that turns gravel before it turns to lake. Half Moon Lake wasn't a resort community so much as a scattering of docks and cabins that had been slowly getting torn down and rebuilt bigger, one lot at a time, by people with more money than patience. Caleb's, I still thought of it as Caleb's, even sitting in the passenger seat with the deed in my purse, sat at the end of a gravel drive behind a stand of half-dead cedars. And even from the road I could tell something was wrong with it. No landscaping. No mailbox flag, no welcome mat, no curtains in any of the windows. A construction dumpster sat rusting by the garage, half full of drywall scraps that had clearly been rained on more than once. Blue tarp, torn loose on one corner, flapped over a section of roof that looked like it had never been finished in the first place. He told us this was done, Renata said, staring through the windshield. He told us at dinner in March they'd already closed on your cottage. He used the word closed. Mom, I got out of the car before I answered her, because I didn't have an answer yet. The front door was unlocked. Which told me something on its own. Nobody locks a door they're proud of leaving unfinished. Inside, the drywall was up in some rooms and missing entirely in others, exposed studs standing like ribs in the gray morning light. Somebody's tools were still laid out on a sawhorse in what might have been meant as a kitchen, rusted from sitting through at least one season of lake damp. I walked the length of the front room and clapped my hands once, an old habit from 30 years of walking into unfamiliar rooms and needing to know how they'd hold sound before anyone asked me to mix in them. The clap came back wrong. Too sharp, too much slap back off bare subfloor and unfinished walls, the sound of a room nobody had ever planned to actually live in. Only to sell. What are you doing? Renata said, not really a question. Listening, I said. This room's never had furniture in it. Ever. You can hear it. She didn't understand what I meant, and I didn't try to explain it to her right then, because a woman in a barn coat was already crossing the gravel toward us with a corgi on a leash, watching us with the particular unhurried suspicion of someone who has lived on a lake long enough to know every car that doesn't belong. Y'all lost, she called out, not unkindly. Friends of the owner, Renata said. Before I could decide how much to tell a stranger, Caleb. The woman said his name like she was testing whether we'd flinch. Haven't seen him out here in, gosh, must be 6 weeks now. He had a little crew out here all spring. I figured he was fixing it up to flip, way these places have been going. Then one day the truck just stopped coming. Sign went up in the yard, for sale by owner, stayed up about 10 days, then came down again without a sale sign or anything after it. Struck me as odd. She shrugged, tugging gently at the leash as the dog strained toward Renata's shoes. House has been sitting like this since. Shame, really. Good bones, that place. Just never got finished. We thanked her, gave her nothing more, and watched her walk the dog back down toward the water before either of us said another word. A flip, Renata said finally, her voice gone flat and dangerous in a way I recognized from when she was 17 and had just found out a boyfriend was lying to her. He took my money I sent for your house, and he tried to flip a lake property. And it failed. He couldn't even sell it. She pulled out her phone right there in the driveway and started typing, and within 20 minutes, standing on the hood of her rental car like a makeshift desk, she had pulled up what the county made public, a construction loan taken out against Caleb's contracting business the same month the deed was filed, 2 mechanics' liens from subcontractors who'd never gotten paid for framing and electrical, and a business license renewal that had lapsed in April and never been renewed. Not proof of anything beyond what we could already see standing in that ruined front room, but it painted the shape of a man who'd been drowning quietly for a long time before he ever touched my money. I'm calling a lawyer, Renata said. Tonight. This is theft, Mom. Actual, prosecutable theft. He had me wire $620,000 under false pretenses and used it to save his failing business. That's fraud, maybe, I said. There's no maybe. Look around you. I am looking around me. And I was, at the water-stained subfloor, at the sawhorse tools nobody had come back for. At a house that didn't sound like anything except abandonment. 30 years of listening to rooms had taught me one thing above everything else: the loudest sound in any space is usually the one nobody's saying out loud. Something made him stop coming out here 6 weeks ago. Something made him stand at your dinner table in March and lie to both our faces with a straight face, and I want to know what that something is before I hand this to a stranger in a suit who's never going to care about the answer. He doesn't deserve that consideration, maybe not. But I'm not doing this for what he deserves. I looked back at the empty front room one more time, the tarp snapping overhead in the lake wind. I want to understand what I'm dealing with before I decide what to do about it. And I am going to deal with it myself. Renata stared at me like I'd started speaking a different language. What does that mean? I didn't answer her right away. I was still listening to the room, to the particular hollow quality of a house that had swallowed my retirement and given nothing back, and somewhere underneath the anger, something colder and more precise was already starting to take shape. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. Something I could build with my own hands, the way I'd built everything else worth having in my life. It means, I finally said, that before anyone calls a lawyer, I'm going to find out exactly what my son has been lying about. And then I'm going to make sure he can't lie about it anymore. Priya Chandrasekharan answered on the second ring, the way she always had, like she'd been sitting by the phone waiting for something interesting to happen to somebody else's life. Eleanor Voss, she said. It's been, what, 4 years? Tell me you're not calling because something broke at the community theater again. I need a favor. And I need you not to ask too many questions before I explain. Now that's a sentence I haven't heard since we were touring with that country act who kept losing his own guitar tech. A pause, and I could hear her setting something down, giving me her full attention. Talk, I told her. Not all of it. I left out the part where my son's name was on that deed, framed it instead as a family situation, something private and complicated involving a property and a person who needed to understand something without being told to his face. Priya had run sound for me on 3 different tours back when we were both young enough to sleep on a bus, and she'd spent the last decade running an AV rental company out of a warehouse off Dickerson Pike, renting light rigs and PA systems to weddings and corporate events and the occasional haunted house attraction every October. If anyone in Nashville had both the equipment and the discretion I needed, it was her. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. You want to make a house feel occupied when it isn't. Smart home stuff, some audio triggers, maybe projection. Nothing that leaves a mark, nothing that a home inspector's going to find with a flashlight, something like that, Eleanor. Her voice dropped, gentler now. This is Caleb's house, isn't it? I didn't answer right away, and that was answer enough. Okay, she said finally. I'm not going to lecture you. God knows I've wanted to do worse to people who deserved it less. But I want you to actually think about what you're building before we build it. Because once it's live, you can't half take it back. I know, do you, though? Because the Eleanor I toured with used to tell sound techs their mix was garbage to their faces and then buy them a beer after. You don't do things by half. I need to know you've thought about the whole show, not just the opening number. I told her I had. I hadn't, not really, not all the way through, but I believed it when I said it, the way you believe most things you say out loud before they've been tested. We met 2 days later at her warehouse, concrete floor cold under fluorescent light, road cases stacked to the ceiling in neat labeled rows. She walked me down an aisle of gear like she was giving a tour of her own life's work, compact smart speakers that could be daisy-chained and controlled from a phone, a set of low-profile projectors no bigger than a hardback book, motion-triggered relay switches meant for haunted house scares that could just as easily flick a porch light or click a thermostat 2 degrees colder on command. Nothing here says ghost, she said, tapping one of the projector cases. It says smart home having a bad week. Big difference, legally and otherwise. A ghost story, somebody calls a priest. A smart home glitching, somebody calls an electrician, and the electrician finds nothing wrong, and everybody just assumes the house is old and cursed with bad Wi-Fi. Before we touched a single piece of equipment, I drove out to see Marcus Webb, who'd lived 2 doors down from me on Fatherland Street for 11 years and had built an elder law practice out of a converted craftsman bungalow with a hand-painted shingle out front. He made coffee in a French press while I laid out the deed, the wire confirmation. Everything Renata had pulled from the county records, and he read through all of it twice before he said a word. I'm going to be honest with you, because you'd know if I wasn't. He set his glasses down on the desk between us. This is ugly, and it's wrong, and I believe every word you've told me. But as a civil matter, it's thin how? Renata has the wire transfer. She has the memo line. It says the purpose right there, it says the purpose Renata intended. It doesn't say Caleb agreed to those terms in writing, doesn't say there was ever a signed agreement about what he was authorized to do with those funds once they landed in an account he controlled. He tapped the papers. Not unkindly. A judge could look at this and see a gift between family members that came with strings nobody wrote down. Family court hates these cases precisely because they're never as clean as the bank record makes them look. You'd spend a year and a small fortune to maybe get a judgment against a man who, by every sign you're describing, doesn't have the money to satisfy it anyway, so he just keeps it. I didn't say that. I said the courtroom isn't going to move fast enough to matter, and it isn't going to get you what you actually want. He looked at me over the rim of his coffee mug, patient in the way of a man who'd spent 30 years watching families tear each other apart over money and knew there was no shortcut around the tearing. What do you actually want, Eleanor? Because I don't think it's a judgment. I think you want to know why. I didn't answer him either. I was getting used to that particular silence, the one that sat where an honest answer should have been. Priya and I built the system over the better part of a week, working evenings in her warehouse with the roll-up door cracked for air, cataloging every piece on a legal pad in her sharp, engineer's handwriting, unit numbers, battery life, coverage radius, which speaker paired with which hub. She taught me the smart home app the way she'd once taught a green stagehand how to patch a monitor board, patient and exacting, no room for a mistake that would cost you in front of an audience. You've still got it, she said, watching me route a signal chain without needing to check the manual twice. 20 years off a soundboard and you still think in signal paths. Some things don't leave you. No, she agreed. They really don't. We drove out to the lake house on a Tuesday, mid-morning, when the handful of neighbors along that stretch of shoreline were mostly at work. Priya backed her van in like she'd done it 100 times, which she had, just never for a job quite like this one. We let ourselves in through a side door that hadn't held a working lock since long before Caleb ever bought the place, and we spent 3 hours moving room to room with the kind of efficiency that comes from decades of load in and load out. Of racing a clock that didn't care about your feelings, the smart speakers went in first, one tucked behind the exposed studs in what would eventually be a hallway closet, another wedged into the crawlspace beneath the living room subfloor where the joists ran close enough to muffle it into something ambient, something you'd feel more than hear. Priya rigged the thermostat to a relay she could trigger remotely, a temperature swing of only 2 or 3 degrees, nothing that would ever register as sabotage, only ever as an old house being an old house. The projector went into an unused utility closet off what looked like it was meant to be a mudroom, angled through a gap I widened myself with a hand drill. Aimed at a stretch of hallway wall where morning light would never wash it out completely, I paused with my hand on the drill, halfway through boring a mounting hole into a stud that belonged, legally, to my own son. Priya noticed. She always noticed. "You can stop," she said. "Right now, this second. Nothing's live yet. I can pack all of this back into the van and we drive home and none of this ever happened. I know. I'm not asking if you know. I'm asking if you want to." I looked down the empty hallway, at the bare drywall and the sawdust settling on the subfloor, at the shape of a house my son had lied about to my face across a dinner table while his wife's hands shook around a wine glass. I thought about 31 years in a house I'd paid for one shift at a time, about a retirement cottage that had existed only long enough to be stolen out from under me before I ever saw it. "I want to understand him," I said. "This is how I know how to do that. Everything else, the courts, the lawyers, that's for people who've already given up on understanding and just want it to be over." She didn't try to talk me out of it again. She handed me the drill back and held the level steady against the wall while I finished the hole. We loaded a set of recordings onto the hub that afternoon before we left. Nothing I'd scripted, nothing accusing or theatrical, just fragments I'd pulled from an old digital archive I hadn't opened in years, a birthday party from when Caleb was maybe 9. His voice high and delighted over the sound of candles being blown out, for bars of a piano piece he'd murdered dutifully every Tuesday for 2 years of lessons he'd begged to quit and I'd made him finish. Nothing that announced itself as a message. Just sound, drifting up out of an empty house, the kind of thing a person half remembers and then convinces themselves they imagined. Priya tested the relay connections one final time from the driveway, phone in hand, watching the thermostat tick down 2 degrees and the hallway light flicker once, exactly as programmed, nothing more. "It's clean," she said. "Nobody finds this by accident. You'd have to be looking, and even then you'd have to know what you were looking for." We drove back into the city as the light went gold over the water behind us, and neither of us said much. I kept thinking about a text Renata had forwarded me that morning, one she'd gotten from Danny, brittle and apologetic, explaining that they'd decided to move into the lake house that weekend. No more waiting, no more excuses, the money simply wasn't there for anywhere else. Caleb needed to be closer to a job site out that way, she'd written, like that explained anything at all. That night I sat at my own kitchen table with Priya's phone number saved under a new contact, system access, and the full weight of what I just built finally settling into my chest. Somewhere across town. My son was packing boxes into a truck bed, getting ready to carry his wife and everything they owned into a house wired top to bottom with the sound of his own childhood, and he had no idea any of it was waiting for him. They moved in on a Saturday, U-Haul groaning up the gravel drive with everything they owned crammed in the back, Caleb driving, Danny following in her sedan with Mia strapped into the back seat, a stuffed rabbit wedged against the window glass. I know because Priya had a friend with a drone hobby and a very casual definition of what counted as public airspace, and because some part of me needed to see it happen instead of just hearing about it secondhand, I watched from my phone screen at my own kitchen table. Priya's app opened beside a mug of coffee gone cold, and told myself I was gathering information. That was the word I used. Information. They didn't unpack much that first night, a folding table, an air mattress, boxes stacked against walls that still smelled like sawdust and old rain. Danny walked the halls with her phone flashlight even with the overhead lights working fine, the particular caution of a person who doesn't trust a house yet. Caleb kept up a running commentary about square footage and lake views like he was narrating a real estate listing to himself, the same charm he'd used at my dinner table now aimed at 4 bare walls and a wife who wasn't buying it. The system stayed quiet that first night. Priya and I had agreed on that going in, let them settle, let the house earn their trust before it started to lose it. Instinct, not mercy, though I told myself it was mercy. Give an audience time to relax before the first note lands. You never open a show cold. Tuesday night, I triggered the first recording. Just once, low volume, run through the speaker tucked into the crawlspace beneath the living room. 4 bars of piano, halting and uneven, a child working through a passage he clearly resented. Caleb, age 9, 30 years and 1,000 better recordings ago, captured on a cassette I digitized a decade back and never once thought I'd use like this. Danny heard it first. I know because Priya had the audio pickup running too, a baby monitor's worth of fidelity, enough to catch her voice going thin and startled in the dark. Caleb. Do you hear that? A pause, rustling, the particular silence of someone straining to hear something that's already stopped. Hear what? Piano. I swear I just heard piano. There's no piano in this house, Danny, I know that. That's why I'm asking you to listen. He didn't hear it, because I'd only run it for 11 seconds and by the time he was awake enough to focus, the house had gone back to its ordinary hum of refrigerator and settling frame. She lay there a long time after that, Priya's pickup catching nothing but breathing and eventually, the particular stillness of someone pretending to be asleep so their husband will stop asking if they're okay. I sat at my kitchen table with my hand over my mouth, staring at a waveform on a laptop screen, and felt something I hadn't accounted for building in my chest. Not triumph. Something closer to the feeling of walking backstage during a show and hearing an actor cry for real. Wednesday, I let the thermostat do its work. 2 degrees down at 3 a.m., nothing dramatic, nothing that would trip an alarm or draw an electrician's eye, just enough that Danny woke up pulling a blanket tighter around herself and Caleb got up to check the app on his phone, saw nothing wrong, and stood in the dark kitchen a long moment before going back to bed. I watched him do it. I watched my son stand alone in a kitchen at 3 in the morning, confused by a house that was lying to him in a language only I understood, and I told myself this was information gathering too. Thursday, Priya and I argued for the first time since we'd built the rig. You're speeding up, she said, over the phone, not bothering to soften it. 2 nights ago it was once. Last night it was twice. You're escalating faster than we planned. I want him to notice. He is noticing. That's the problem. Noticing and understanding aren't the same thing, and right now all you're building is a scared house. Not an honest conversation. A pause, the particular quiet she used when she was deciding how hard to push. Eleanor. What are you actually trying to get him to do? I didn't have a clean answer. I'd built a machine designed to produce discomfort, and now that it was working, I wasn't entirely sure discomfort was going to arrive carrying the truth I wanted, rather than just more silence, more locked doors, more distance between me and a son I hadn't managed to talk to in 3 weeks. I want him to break, I said finally, and hated how it sounded out loud. Then you'd better be ready for what he says when he does. Friday morning, the photograph appeared. Not staged by me. Priya had loaded a handful of digitized family photos into the projector's rotation days earlier, set to display faintly on the hallway wall for a few seconds at odd hours, images so brief and so dim they'd read as a trick of light rather than a picture. This one came up at 6:40 a.m., Caleb padding down the hall in sweatpants toward the coffee maker, a photo of himself at maybe 7 years old, gap-toothed, sitting at an old upright piano in what had been my living room in Green Hills before we'd sold that house years ago. He stopped mid-stride. Stood there long enough that the projection had already faded by the time he reached out and touched the blank wall, fingers spread against drywall like he expected to find something underneath. Danny. His voice came out strange, thinner than I'd heard it in years. Did you put a picture up in the hallway? What picture? Never mind. A long pause, Priya's audio catching the particular rasp of a man rubbing his face with both hands. Never mind. I didn't sleep well. That was the first time I heard him lie to her about something happening in that house, and it landed differently than I expected. Not satisfying. Closer to watching a structural crack appear in something you built with your own hands and only then understanding how much weight it was carrying. By the weekend, the fights had started, not loud ones, not yet, but the low, worn-thin arguments of two people running out of patience with each other under a strain neither would name out loud. I heard fragments of it through Priya's pickups, Danny asking if they'd made a mistake buying this place, Caleb snapping that they didn't have the luxury of mistakes anymore, both of them retreating into separate rooms afterward, the particular silence of a marriage absorbing damage it hadn't budgeted for. "We need cameras," Caleb said Sunday night, pacing the kitchen while Danny sat with her knees pulled up on a folding chair. "Something's wrong with this house. Either it's actually got a wiring problem or somebody's messing with us. And either way I want proof. Who would be messing with us, Caleb?" He didn't answer that. I watched the silence stretch out on my laptop screen and felt my stomach drop, because I knew exactly who he was thinking of, and I knew he wasn't going to say my name out loud to his wife. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if I didn't force it. Monday afternoon, he nearly did what I'd been dreading since the first night. He was up in the attic access above the hallway closet, flashlight in hand, chasing down what he assumed was a mouse in the walls, and his beam swept within 18 inches of the relay box Priya had zip-tied to a joist. I watched the feed from my kitchen table with my heart going hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. And for 3 full seconds I thought it was over, thought he'd see the little black box with its blinking amber light and understand everything, right there, standing in the crawlspace above his own living room. He didn't. His flashlight beam drifted past it toward a scuffling sound Priya had triggered deliberately, a faint rustle meant to read as rodents, cheap insurance against exactly this moment, and he climbed back down muttering about calling an exterminator instead of an electrician. I sat very still after that, both hands flat on my kitchen table, and understood for the first time just how close I'd come to losing control of something I'd told myself, all along, that I could control completely. "That's your warning shot," Priya said when I called her, breathless, 20 minutes later. "Next time he's up there, he's not looking for a mouse. He's looking for what actually made that sound. You need to think hard about how many more nights you want to run this before somebody finds something they can hold in their hand." I told her I understood. I'm not sure I did, not fully, not yet. Some part of me was still watching my son flinch at his own house and mistaking the ache in my chest for justice being served rather than what it actually was, which was closer to grief with nowhere left to go. Tuesday night, I ran the piano recording one more time, longer this time, a full 16 bars instead of 4. Some reckless need in me to be heard clearly instead of half heard and dismissed as imagination. Caleb woke up first this time. I watched him sit bolt upright in the dark, listening, his whole body gone rigid in a way that told me he recognized it, not just as music, but as that music, the piece he'd murdered dutifully every Tuesday for 2 years of lessons he'd begged to quit. He got up. Didn't wake Danny, didn't turn on the lights, just moved through the dark house room by room with his phone flashlight sweeping low across the floor, methodical in a way that told me 39 years hadn't erased the part of him that used to help me troubleshoot a stubborn sound system before a show. He worked his way toward the living room, toward the hallway closet, toward the exact stretch of wall where Priya had mounted the crawlspace speaker 18 inches below the subfloor. He crouched down. Pressed his ear against the baseboard the way you check a wall for a leak, listening for something that had already gone silent by then, the recording having run its course. And then his flashlight beam caught something in the gap where the baseboard met the drywall, a hairline seam that didn't belong there, trim that had been pried loose and reset just slightly crooked, the kind of imperfection only a contractor's eye would ever have caught. He worked his fingers into the gap. Pulled, the little black speaker came free in his hand, wires trailing behind it into the dark space beneath the floor, and I watched my son go completely still on my laptop screen, staring down at proof that someone had been inside his house, in the walls of it, close enough to touch, and he had no idea yet that the someone was me. Caleb stood in that hallway for a long time, the speaker cradled in his palm like something that might still be alive. Then, according to what Renata pieced together for me later, he did the only thing that made sense to a man raised by 2 people who'd spent their lives making things with their hands. He started tracing wires. He found a second speaker within the hour. The one wedged into the crawlspace under the living room. He found the relay box zip-tied to the joist above the hallway closet, its amber light blinking patient and stupid in his flashlight beam. By the time Danny came looking for him, he was sitting cross-legged on the bare subfloor with 3 pieces of equipment lined up in front of him like evidence at a crime scene, because that's exactly what they were. Caleb. What is all this? It's not a wiring problem. His voice had gone flat, the particular flatness of a man doing math he didn't want to be doing. Somebody's been in our house. In the walls. For days, he didn't say my name that night. But he didn't have to work very hard to get there. The piano recording was the kind of detail that only pointed one direction. And he knew exactly whose old cassette collection that music had come from. He called Renata first, not me, at 11 at night, voice shaking in a way she said she'd never heard from her brother before. She called me the second he hung up, and I sat at my kitchen table with the phone against my ear, Priya's laptop still glowing in front of me, and understood that the show, as Priya liked to call it, was about to get an audience I hadn't planned for. They showed up at my door 40 minutes later. Caleb first, the speaker still in his hand like a piece of confiscated contraband, Danny a step behind him, a canvas tote bag slung crosswise over her body that she hadn't bothered to set down in the car. She'd come straight from Nashville General that afternoon, she told me later, straight from a specialist's office to intercept Caleb before he did something he couldn't take back, and she'd never had a spare minute to leave the bag at home. You want to explain this? Caleb held the speaker up under my porch light like a prosecutor entering evidence. Because I've got a wireless motion sensor in my attic and a piano recording I haven't heard in 30 years playing through my living room floor at 2 in the morning, and I keep coming back to the same answer, and I need you to tell me I'm wrong. I could have lied. Some old instinct in me, the one that used to talk sound text through a blown board 30 seconds before a show. The one that never let a crisis show on my face, wanted to stand there and deny every word of it. But I was tired in a way that went past the hour, and I'd spent 3 weeks listening to my son's marriage come apart through a baby monitor, and I didn't have the stomach left to add a lie on top of it. You're not wrong, I said. Danny made a small sound behind him, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. You've been in our house. I have. You recorded him. As a kid. You put it in our walls. Her voice climbed, cracked. Do you have any idea what the last 2 weeks have been like? I thought I was losing my mind. I thought this house was cursed. I called an electrician. I nearly called a priest. You stole $620,000 from me, I said, and even as it left my mouth I heard how it sounded, righteous and clean, a woman standing on a porch reciting a number like it explained everything. Renata sent that money for my house. My retirement. And you took it and bought a lake property in your own name and let me believe I'd been forgotten. You don't know anything about why, then tell me. My voice came out harder than I meant it. Tell me why, Caleb. Because I have spent 3 weeks trying to build a house that would make you tell me the truth, and it worked. So here we are. Tell me, that was when it happened, not dramatically. Nothing thrown, nothing shouted loud enough for the neighbors. Danny stepped forward, one hand out like she meant to physically get between the two of us, the strap of her tote bag catching on the porch railing as she moved. It swung off her shoulder, hit the top step, and everything inside it slid out across the wood in the porch light, her wallet, a half-eaten granola bar, and a thick manila folder that split open on impact, spilling papers across the boards between us. I saw the letterhead before I saw anything else. Vanderbilt Pediatric Rheumatology and Immunology. And beneath it, in the kind of clinical language that doesn't soften anything, a name I knew, a birth date I knew. And a diagnosis I didn't. I bent down out of pure habit, the same habit that had me picking up dropped cues and dropped scripts for 40 years, and my hand closed around a page before I understood what I was reading. Mia R. Pavas, DOB March 11, 2018. Diagnosis, juvenile onset systemic autoimmune disorder, presenting atypically. Below that, a list of specialist names, a treatment protocol I didn't recognize the words for, and a line item that made my stomach drop straight through the porch boards, estimated annual cost of biologic infusion therapy not covered under current plan, $340,000. Don't. Danny's hand shot out, but it was too late. I was already looking at the second page. The insurance denial letter, the date stamped in the corner. Denied, investigational treatment. Mia. My voice came out smaller than I intended. This is Mia. Caleb sank down onto my top step like his legs had simply stopped working. The speaker rolled out of his hand and clattered down 2 steps and neither of us moved to catch it. She got sick in January, he said, to the porch boards, not to me. We didn't know what it was for weeks. Every specialist had a different guess. By March they finally had a name for it, and a treatment that might actually work, and insurance called it investigational and denied it flat, twice, and every appeal took another month we didn't have while she kept getting weaker. He rubbed both hands over his face. We were $340,000 short for year 1 alone. Ongoing. Not a one-time thing. Forever, unless something changes, so you took the wire. I told myself I'd sell the lake house fast. Flip it in 60, 90 days, use the profit to cover the first round of treatment, put your cottage money back before you even noticed a delay. His laugh came out broken, nothing like a laugh at all. I've flipped 4 houses in my life and never once been this stupid about the math. The market moved. The place needed more work than I budgeted. And every week I didn't have a buyer was another week I was choosing between my daughter's treatment and telling my own mother I'd stolen from her. I stood there on my own porch with a stranger's, no, not a stranger's, my granddaughter's, medical records fanned out across the wood at my feet, and every carefully built justification I'd been carrying for 3 weeks came apart at once, the way a mix collapses the second you realize you've been listening to it wrong the whole time. I hadn't been haunting a man who'd stolen my house out of greed. I'd been haunting a father and mother sitting up every night with a sick 8-year-old, using his own childhood against him, timing his collapse like a director cueing a final act. How is she? I heard myself ask. Right now. Tonight, stable. Danny's voice had gone hollow. For now. She's staying with my sister this week because we didn't want her in a house that felt like something was wrong with it. Which, I guess, something was. I didn't say anything else that night. I gathered the papers off my porch floor with hands that weren't entirely steady, put them back in order as best I could, and handed the folder back to Danny without another word, because there wasn't a word built yet for what I needed to say. They left a few minutes later, Caleb carrying the speaker back to his truck like it weighed considerably more than it had an hour before. I stood on my porch until their taillights disappeared down the street, and then I went inside and sat at my kitchen table and didn't move for a long time. Eventually I opened Priya's laptop. Not to change anything, just to listen. I pulled up the audio logs from the past 3 weeks, the piano recording, the thermostat triggers, my own recorded voice from years I'd nearly forgotten I'd kept, and I played them back one at a time in my dark kitchen, headphones on, the way I used to sit alone in a booth after a show ended and listen back to every note that had gone out into the room. They sounded different now. What I'd built to feel like an accusation played back to me like something closer to a lullaby gone wrong, my son's 9-year-old voice fumbling through a piece he'd hated, looped and hidden inside the walls of a house where his own daughter's survival was being negotiated in insurance denial letters. I'd meant it as a message. Listening to it now, it sounded like something closer to cruelty, dressed up in a professional's polish because I hadn't wanted to look at it plainly. I texted Priya at midnight. Shut it all down. Tonight. Every device, every trigger, all of it. She called instead of texting back. What happened? I told her. She was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Okay, she said finally, gently, the way you talk someone down off a ledge they'd built themselves. It's done. I'll pull the relay data remotely first thing tomorrow, but the triggers are already disabled from my end right now. Nothing else fires. I need it gone completely. Every trace. Eleanor. It's off. I promise you it's off. A pause. This isn't your fault. You didn't know, I built a machine to punish a man for the exact same thing I would have done for my own child, I said, and didn't wait for her to answer, because there wasn't an answer that was going to make that sentence smaller. I shut the system down that night, every last piece of it, weeks after I should have in one confrontation too late to undo what 3 weeks of ambient dread had already done to 2 exhausted parents. I didn't know it yet, sitting alone at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning, but the damage didn't stop the moment I flipped the switch. Something in Caleb had already come loose under the strain. And it was going to take a hospital hallway, not a porch conversation, before either of us understood exactly how much. The call came 4 days later, on a Thursday evening, while I was standing at my own kitchen sink washing a single coffee cup I hadn't needed to dirty. Renata's name on the screen. She never called on weeknights unless something was wrong, Mom. Her voice already had the flat, controlled quality of someone forcing themselves to stay calm. Mia's in the hospital. They think it's a reaction to the new infusion protocol. Caleb called me 20 minutes ago and he wasn't making a lot of sense. I didn't ask questions. I got my keys, got in the car, and drove to Nashville General with my hands steadier on the wheel than they had any right to be. Given how hard my heart was working, I found them in the pediatric wing waiting area, Danny sitting very still in a plastic chair with her coat still on, staring at nothing, and Caleb pacing a stretch of hallway tile like a man walking off a cramp that wouldn't release. He'd lost weight in the 3 weeks since that porch conversation. I noticed it the way you notice a mix that's gone thin, not any one element missing, just an overall lack of body that tells you something's wrong with the balance. He saw me first. Stopped pacing. For a second I thought he might tell me to leave, and some part of me was already rehearsing how I'd take that, how I'd go sit in my car in the parking garage and wait to hear something secondhand through Renata like I had no right to be here at all. He didn't tell me to leave, they're running tests, he said instead, voice worn down to something plain and exhausted. Fever spiked fast this afternoon. Her infusion nurse said it happens sometimes with this treatment, that it's usually manageable, but they want to keep her overnight to watch for a bigger reaction. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. Danny's barely said a word in an hour. I sat down 2 chairs away from Danny, close enough that she'd know I was there, far enough that I wasn't demanding anything from her. She glanced at me once, and I watched something in her face decide, in real time, not to ask me to go. We waited a long time. A doctor came out around 9 and told us Mia's fever had come down. That they'd adjust the protocol and keep monitoring her through the night, that this kind of setback wasn't unusual and didn't mean the treatment had failed. Danny cried then, quietly, the kind of crying that comes out sideways after you've been holding a shape too long. Caleb put his hand on her back and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything left to say that either of them hadn't already said to themselves 100 times that night. Around 11, with Mia finally asleep and Danny dozing in the chair beside her bed, Caleb found me in the hospital cafeteria, empty except for the hum of a floor buffer somewhere down the hall and the fluorescent lights doing that thing fluorescent lights do at midnight, turning everyone the same shade of gray. I had a vending machine coffee in front of me I hadn't touched. He sat down across the table with one of his own, and for a while neither of us drank it. I know it was you, he said finally. The recordings. The thermostat. All of it. I've known since I found that speaker. I know you know. I haven't told Danny how sure I am. She thinks maybe it was some kind of malfunction, or she wants to think that, because the alternative is that her mother-in-law spent 3 weeks running a psychological operation on her while her kid was fighting for her life 200 yards from where we were sleeping. He turned the coffee cup a slow quarter turn on the table. Not drinking it, just needing something to do with his hands. I keep trying to be angry about it and I can't hold on to it. I took your money, Mom. I lied to your face at a dinner table. Whatever you did after that, I handed you the reason to do it. I didn't know about Mia when I started, I know that too. Doesn't change what it felt like on our end. 3 weeks of thinking the house was turning on us, on top of everything else. He finally looked at me straight on, something raw in his face I hadn't seen since he was a boy bringing me a broken toy he thought I could fix with nothing but stubbornness and duct tape. I need you to understand I didn't take that money because I'm careless with what you've earned. I took it because I looked at a $620,000 wire sitting in an account I controlled, and I looked at my daughter, and every version of asking you for help felt slower than the one I could act on that same afternoon. I told myself I'd fix the math before you ever noticed. I was wrong about how fast I could fix it. I wasn't wrong about why I did it, you should have told me. Not Renata. Me. That first week, I know, I would have found a way. Maybe not all of it, not fast, but you didn't give me the chance to try. You decided for both of us that I'd say no, or that I couldn't be trusted with something that's serious, and you were wrong on both counts, and now I've spent 3 weeks turning myself into someone I don't recognize because you made that decision without me. My voice didn't rise. I didn't have the energy left to raise it. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not even the money. The deciding for me, he didn't argue with that. He just sat with it, the way you sit with a note that's landed wrong and can't be taken back, only resolved by what comes after. What happens now? He asked. To the house. To us, I'm not taking you to court. I'd decided that somewhere around 1 in the morning 3 nights earlier, sitting alone with headphones on, listening to my own voice accuse a man of exactly the kind of desperate love I'd have been capable of myself. Marcus already told me what a civil case would actually get me, and it isn't enough to be worth what it would cost your family on top of everything you're already carrying. I'm not interested in bankrupting you while Mia's in a hospital bed a floor above us. That's not the same as forgiving me, no. It isn't. I let that sit between us, plain and unsoftened, because I wasn't going to hand him something I didn't actually feel just because the room was tired and the hour was late and his daughter was sick. I don't forgive what you did. I don't know yet if I will. What I've decided is that the debt gets paid, on a schedule that doesn't take food off your table or treatment away from Mia. The lake house goes on the rental market, short-term, tourist traffic, whatever it can pull in, and that income comes to me until the $620,000 is accounted for. Whatever's left after Mia's care is stable, we figure out together. Not overnight. Not as charity. As a debt, being repaid, by people I still expect better from. Caleb nodded slowly, like a man accepting terms he knew he had no right to negotiate down. And us? You and me, I don't know yet. I finally picked up the coffee, more to have something to hold than because I wanted it. I know I came to a hospital tonight instead of staying home with my anger, and that has to count for something, even if I can't tell you tonight what it counts toward. I know I'm tired of being the person who finds out about your life secondhand, through your sister, through a folder that fell out of a bag. If we're going to rebuild anything, it starts with you telling me things before I have to go digging for them in the walls of a house. No more digging, he said, and something that wasn't quite a smile moved across his face, exhausted and honest. No more digging. I promise you that much. We sat there another few minutes in the hum of the fluorescent lights, two people who'd spent 3 weeks lying to each other in different directions, neither of us reaching for anything more than what had already been said. When he finally stood to go back up and sit with Danny and Mia, he paused at the edge of the table. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said. "I wasn't sure you would, she's my granddaughter," I said, and that, at least, needed no further explanation between us. "Go be with her. I'll be here if you need anything." He nodded and walked back toward the elevators, and I sat alone in that gray cafeteria a while longer, turning an untouched cup of coffee in my hands and understanding, for the first time in 3 weeks, that I had no idea what came next, only that whatever it was going to be built out of something more honest than either silence or sound effects. Marcus drew up the paperwork the following week, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table with a legal pad instead of the folder of medical records that had sat there so many nights before. Not a lawsuit. Not a settlement wrung out of a courtroom. A private arrangement between two adults who happened to be mother and son, built the way I used to build a sound mix, one channel at a time, nothing left to guess at. The lake house went up for short-term rental within the month. Priya helped me list it, took the photographs herself, framed the water view so it looked like exactly what it had always been underneath all the debt and all the deception, a good house on a good piece of shoreline that had simply been asked to carry more than it could hold. The bookings came steadily through the summer. Every dollar it earned went first to me, toward the $620,000. And once that account settled, whatever came after would go straight to Mia's ongoing care, the biologic infusions that weren't going anywhere anytime soon, a debt owed less to me than to a little girl who'd never asked anyone to steal on her behalf. Caleb texted me updates most weeks. Booking numbers, a plumbing repair he'd handled himself to keep costs down, once a photograph of Mia at a follow-up appointment, thumbs up, tired eyes, a hospital bracelet still on her wrist. I answered most of those texts. Some I let sit a day before I did. We weren't fixed. I want to be honest about that, the way I'd learned, late and expensively, that honesty was the only currency that had ever actually been worth anything in this family. Caleb and I still hadn't sat down to a meal together since the porch, since the hospital. Danny sent a card at some point that summer, careful and formal, thanking me for the repayment terms, and I read it twice and put it in a drawer instead of on the mantel, because I wasn't ready yet for it to sit somewhere I'd see it every day. Renata told me once, gently, that she thought I was still angry. I told her she wasn't wrong, and that being right about that didn't mean I needed to do anything different about it yet. Understanding, I told him in that cafeteria, wasn't the same as forgiveness. I'd meant it then. I still meant it in August, watching the numbers on the rental account tick upward one guest reservation at a time. Some debts get repaid in dollars. Others take longer, and you don't always get to set the schedule on those yourself. What I did get to set was mine. The community theater on Gallatin Avenue had been posting for a part-time sound tech for 3 weeks before I finally called the number on the flyer. Small building, worse acoustics than any hall I'd ever mixed in professionally, a board older than some of the actors it served. The artistic director, a wiry woman named Sophia who ran the place on caffeine and sheer stubbornness, looked at my resume like she couldn't quite believe someone with 30 years at a real concert hall wanted to spend her Tuesdays fixing feedback in a 400-seat black box theater. It doesn't pay much, she warned me. I didn't ask what it pays. I started the next week. My first show back was a community production of some tired old musical review, actors who'd never hit a cue on time in their lives, a lead vocal mic that buzzed every time anyone walked past stage left. I spent 2 hours before the first rehearsal just listening to the room the way I used to, clapping in the corners, walking the aisles, learning where the sound pooled and where it died. It wasn't the concert hall. It wasn't the work I'd spent a career building a reputation on. But sitting behind that battered little board on opening night, headphones on, watching a stage full of amateurs give everything they had to an audience of 40 people who'd paid $12 a ticket. I felt something loosen in my chest that hadn't loosened in months. I'd spent 10 weeks building sound to make my own son doubt his own house. It took me the rest of that summer to remember what sound was actually for. Late September, Caleb called instead of texting, which had become rare enough that I answered on the first ring, already braced for bad news. It wasn't. Mia's latest scan had come back stable, the infusion protocol finally settling into something predictable, something they could plan around instead of just survive. He told me the rental income had cleared another chunk of what he owed. He asked, careful, almost shy about it, whether I'd want to come to her birthday in October. Nothing elaborate. Just family. If I wanted to be there, I told him I'd think about it. I meant it honestly, both the thinking and the not yet deciding, and for the first time since that porch, that felt like enough to offer him. That night I sat on my back steps with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands, listening to the ordinary sounds of my own neighborhood settling into evening, and thought about the board waiting for me on Tuesday, about a new show going up in November that Sophia wanted my ear on from the very first rehearsal, about a life I was building that had nothing to do with cleaning up anyone else's mess and everything to do with what I still had left to give a room. On my own terms, when I chose to give it.